All right. So, Chip, I'll go with you.
All right.
We'll start with you. Gary Patterson, 39, significantly lower than the fellas here, significantly lower than where he finished. Why the concern, or I guess disdain, for Gary Patterson?
Concern, and it's immediately turned into like hoping that I'm wrong, because I've been picking up on this. I might be on TCU to be a really good team in 2021, something that would absolutely reverse this ranking and this stock. But it was before I reached that conclusion, it was saying, okay, if you look at Gary Patterson's history, anytime he's had a down year, he's always had a bounce back. Are we sure that that can happen now? Because when the bounce back happened before, he might have been in another conference. It was pre the Big 12 move. Can we even take those kinds of ups and downs into consideration, given the way that the competition has changed? You look at, just some of the ways that even defensively they lost their way. And that was the big red flag, because, Gary Patterson's supposed to be the defensive mastermind, one of the best game planners, one of the best in-game defensive adjustment coaches in all of college football. So as TCU lost its way a little bit throughout last season, I would say that I started to wonder if Gary Patterson's time is coming to a little bit of a close. And again, I say that with the expectation that this could change really quickly, because I do believe there's a great buy low opportunity with TCU in the Big 12. So I kind of feel like the shine of him being a top 10 coach, which is where I've ranked him, 5-6 years ago. You probably catch me in 2015, 2016. I'm telling you, he is one of the best coaches in all of college football, especially after getting TCU to the place where they're, Big 12 co-champions. They're playing Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. I think that I was probably letting that seem like it was even more in the past, just because I started to get a little bit of a whiff that maybe things were coming to a close, time had run its course, and that while he's the greatest coach in program history, maybe TCU would start to look elsewhere. I could very well be wrong, because again, I'm kind of thinking that I'm gonna pick up a little bit of TCU stock heading into 2020, but that's also knowing that my initial inclination could be right. All of the pieces could be there, where they've got one of the highest rated quarterbacks ever brought into the program, one of the highest rated wide receivers ever brought into the program. You've got an offense that should be really, really impactful. And yet if they fall flat again, and if the defense is bad, then you're going to start looking around and be like, hey, is this it? Like, are we going to start looking at a coaching change at TCU? When's that going to happen? I think that those conversations are 1 to 2 bad seasons away. And I think that that's why his stock slipped in my mind.
But you had him 15.
I think that reflects that I'm high on him this year. I think Coach Patterson can still coach, but I do think it is much more difficult, as Chip noted, to be that consistent in a league like the Big 12 than it was, in a G5 league, right? Like the fluctuations you have in trying to recruit against Oklahoma and Texas and all those teams are going to be greater. And when you have a bust, it matters more in a league where other teams have more talent than you do. They've had some misses in recruiting, but I think they've also had some coaching staff turnover. I still have some faith in Gary Patterson. Maybe 15 is too high.
All right. I have been accused before of being an instigator on social media. So I found some spots here that we might be able to instigate some arguments. I feel like I'm a producer of First Take right now in the pre-show meeting. All right, you said this and you said this. Go. Kirk Ferentz. I know we just talked about him a little bit. Tom, you are very high on Kirk Ferentz, 13 overall. Bud, an extremely low 46. That is one of the biggest disparities we have. 33 spots different in there. Tom, you go first.
For me, it's just kind of respecting the long-term consistency of what he's done. Like we talked about it earlier, the Iowa program he took over wasn't exactly a juggernaut. They went 1-10 in his first season. They went 3-9 in his second season, and then they made their first bowl game at 7-5. Then in year 4, they're winning the Big Ten and going to the Orange Bowl. In year 6, they're winning the Big Ten and going to the Capital One Bowl. Well, they split the Big Ten. That was back before we had championship games, kids, way back in the long, long ago. But like, this is a guy who for years has been taking this Iowa team to bowl games. He's been he hasn't been recruiting super high top level talent for the most part. It's started to improve in recent years where they're getting more 4 and 5 star talent, but for a bulk of his time, it was mostly 3-star kids, under recruited, bringing them in, developing them, and sending them on to the NFL. And for me, being able to do that for 20 years consistently, that's worth more to me than, I don't know, a guy going 9-3 one year.
Since the Big Ten went to divisional play, he's lost 6-8-5-6, 2, which was awesome, 5-5-4, and 3 games. So in a weird way, the 2 most recent seasons are actually a lot more impressive. Most of his good work was done before they went to divisional play and before they had, the last round of expansion. I think Kirk Ferentz can coach. Do I think he's on the upswing? Not really. Some of that stuff last summer, I factored into this, right? I think increasingly you're having to recruit and coach a different type of player. Now, maybe you can recruit to your model. I think a lot of coaches do that successfully, but I don't know. I'm not as impressed as I used to be. And I wonder, would we have him this high if he wasn't in the SEC or if he wasn't in the Big Ten West, right? Like if he's in the East, is he making bowl games consistently? I don't know, probably, but I don't think they're threatening for East titles anytime soon. Part of this loss avoidance, I think, is being from the West.
Do you think that there was a time, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Kirk Ferentz always on that like NFL might be interested list?
Yes.
Him and David Shaw.
When was that? Like a decade ago?
Mm-hmm.
Feels like it must have been, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That suggests some coaching acumen, like not necessarily in talent acquisition, but that at least suggests that, in terms of being able to put together game plan, coach up the game and do just the very basics coaching of football. Like, Kirk Ferentz drops to D2, he probably wins a national championship or something like that. Those sorts of, that's in my mind, that's what's on my flip card when I pull up Ferentz.
I will say this as far as is he on an upward trend or a downward trend? Let's remember everything that happened with that program in the offseason, the way it was handled, and the concerns about, maybe he's going to lose that locker room. Maybe he's already losing it. Iowa then starts the season 0-2 in a COVID year in which players can just, at that point, hell, we saw it. Players could bail. You know what I mean? They could just give up on the season. They finished by winning their last 6 games. They were the only team that even competed with Northwestern in the West last year. So I'm not as worried about that.
I talked to 5 former Iowa players since the kind of all the issues came out, 5 Black players. So I was curious to know their take on the program. Former players already been through the program. All of them had nothing but positive things to say about Kirk Ferentz. Like and they all made the point that, hey, everybody's experience is different. Maybe for these players that were complaining, it was different for them. But like, I am far less concerned about a culture problem now after talking to some of these players than before. To me, it felt like players weren't happy with playing time, weren't happy with the experience that was there. They wanted to voice it, kind of, took advantage of the opportunity of a national stage. And once that blew over, you kind of got, okay. And they made the file of Chris Doyle, which, felt necessary and the right thing to do. But I think Kirk Ferentz still does have a pretty good thing going there. I'm
probably too low on him then, actually, Danny. Like that take kind of changes my mind a little bit.
Yeah. And of course,
now, I'm not 13 high on him.
Right.
But
right.
Like I'd say like maybe 30 instead of 46.
Closer to the bloated middle.
Listen,
like we all took these like 30 coaches and sort of like stretched them out as much as possible.
And I will readily admit that I'm going to be higher on Big Ten coaches than anybody else in this podcast will be.
Not all of them. I thought so. And I ran some analysis over here. So Tom's average Big Ten ranking is 28. Chip is actually the high man on the Big Ten at 22 somehow, which is kind of crazy. And then I realized that Tom has Loxley at 60, and then Tucker 39, PJ Fleck 36, Scott Frost 37, Tom Allen 26. So it was like he loves the very top of the Big Ten and then doesn't think a whole lot of the rest of it.
Pretty much.
How about my ACC boy compadre over here, Chip? This one was an eyebrow raiser. Pretty big disparity in you and Tom and Bud on Jeff Collins. What have you seen from old Jeff Collins at Georgia Tech to have him as high as 25?
Back-to-back top 30 recruiting classes at Georgia Tech. Like, this is a program that was like recruiting below group of 5 for a long time. And he came in and, for all the like Waffle House shtick and Star Wars little cards and everything that he's got with his presentation, he has recruited at a way that is very difficult at a school that has some academic limitations. And I kind of think that there have been less moments on the field in games where you can hang your hat on and be like, oh man, like this team is really close to totally turning the page. But there are individuals that get out there and you're like, that guy's a player. Like these are very good football players. You get a few more of those, top 25, top 30 classes in here. This could be a Georgia Tech program that, while it was competing for division titles with much less talent under Paul Johnson, it could be a very different story. I think it is recruiting. I think it is the way that he has embraced the full change from having to do a roster turnover. And again, it's like, there's a Florida State game. I think there's a Miami game that they might have ended up losing, but they were at least like super competitive in. Like there's some spots along the way. Yeah.
You have a coach who's 21-26 in his career at 25.
Jeff Collins?
Yeah. 21-26.
Listen, man.
And and it's like, I hate doing that because it makes it come like I'm saying he's a horrible coach. It's like he's 21-26, but because he's got two good recruiting classes, you've got him in your top 25.
He was good at Temple too.
All right. Well, why was Jeff Haffley at 23?
I've got Jeff Haffley
at 23.
That Boston
ACC boy.
Tom, you're actually the outlier on Haffley.
Yeah, I would disagree with your 31 as well, but 23 just seems extreme to me because Jeff Haffley's been a head coach for one season and went 5-5.
That Boston College
top
team
25.
was good. That was a good Boston College team last year.
They were competitive. So on Collins, I wasn't really sure how much credit to give him for recruiting, because if we're going to say like, hey, Kirby Smart can fall out of bed at Georgia and get a top 10 class, well, Kirby Smart can only sign 25 dudes. Right? Like Georgia Tech was recruiting like a G5 team on purpose because they chose to run the option in a talent rich, like one of the like most talented cities in the country. Like I'm all for Kansas running the option. I think they should have hired Duncan, but like, guys, at Georgia Tech, you should not run something that is like basically an answer to not being able to get talent. You can get talent at Georgia Tech.
What about getting them into school?
It's not as easy, but there's a lot of good prep schools in the Atlanta area that have kids that have grades. Stanford takes a couple, Vandy takes a couple, Northwestern occasionally will dip down there. Notre Dame hits them really hard. You can certainly do it. I wasn't sure how much credit to give him for it. He's improved their recruiting, but how much is that with him? And how much of that was just not running something that nobody wants to play in, right? With Haffley, I also took a look at Ohio State's defense last year, and particularly the secondary. And just from guys I know in the industry who, when Haffley was an assistant, this is just, I guess, some insider information. They're like, that guy's going to be a head coach in the NFL someday. Like, he's dynamite. He's got the goods. Ohio State's not going to be as good because he left. Like, they're really going to miss him. And I thought he did a very nice job navigating, Boston College, a team that they didn't get to meet last year because Massachusetts had some of the most strict COVID regulations in the whole country. I don't know. I thought 31 was cool. He's a very good recruiter. I thought he did a nice job coaching in the first year. And I think he's going to be the guy moving on up.
Can I add one more Haffley thing?
Sure,
we always talk about the defensive coordinator. He didn't coach like a defensive coordinator. Phil Jerkovich threw the ball like 42 times a game. I mean, he is almost taken like a Ohio State kind of approach. Like he was like, ooh, this is what we're going to do. We've got Zay Flowers. We're going to try to overwhelm you on the outside. We're trying to hit explosive plays. I mean, David Bailey's not one of the best running backs in the ACC. He doesn't have like a Montel Harris back there or an AJ Dillon to be able to just play the bully ball that Adazio did. But at the same time, that doesn't come necessarily with the script of defensive coordinator gets hired, runs conservative offense. That was not what BC did.
I will say, I want to be clear. I really like Haffley. I loved his defenses at Ohio State. I thought it was a great hire at Boston College. And I think year one was a very good start. I'm a little more conservative. I like to see more from coaches before I just start, bumping them up at 23.
23 and 25 for a 500 and sub 500 ACC coach. That's Chip right there. We're good.
Little
Chip does love the
optimistic.
ACC. Yeah, for sure.
All right. I got beef with two of you guys who have this coach in the bottom 15 of the Power Five at 51 and 53. Tom's the only one with some common sense. And even him at 29, I think it's a little low. In 9 years at Stanford, David Shaw only has one sub 500 season, which was in 2019, 4-8, his worst season by far. Has had multiple 11 and 12 win seasons, has a Rose Bowl title, multiple Rose Bowl titles, and yet you guys have him checking in at 51 and 53. And remind you, last year, they lost the first two and then won out their remaining 4 games for a 4-2 finish to go second in the North. I think you guys are way too far down on David Shaw. And he's one of those coaches that I look at and bring him up in that category of does more with less at Stanford.
I'm willing to admit I could be off here. Now, granted, Tom is the outlier in still believing. But
right.
For me, it was tough to separate like situational factors that have impacted Stanford in new ways from David Shaw's coaching ability. I do think their offense has not adapted quite as much like some of these offenses have. I mean, if we're going to ding Jimbo Fisher for doing that, then we probably need to ding David Shaw for that as well. But the thing that has really hurt them, in my opinion, has been the early signing period and also the transfer portal. Like Stanford doesn't take that many transfers, and the early signing period, there's a reason David Shaw was by far the most vocal coach out there in opposition to when the early signing period was being proposed in 2017. Like there's no doubt in my mind that has really crippled their recruiting because they're not able to offer acceptance to these kids early on at the rate that any other school in the country does, including the other really good quote unquote academic schools. I guess they're all, if they're schools, they're academic, but you guys get my point on that. But they're just not playing at the level they used to. Even though last year they went 4-2, they weren't like Tom, what did you have them power rated last year? Like in the 50s?
Yeah, they were, God, I don't have it in front of me, but they were in that 40 to 50 somewhere range.
Did y'all watch the NFL Network coverage? Obviously, we were all watching the CBS Sports Fantasy, CBS Sports Fantasy show, but David Shaw was kind of killing it on the draft coverage, and I was like, he
always does a good job on that.
Yeah. But
good.
Do you know what he knew, Tom? This is what he knew that was different than the average year when he has like great scouting reports and does a good job of being a communicator. He knew a lot about what NFL teams had done. Like for someone who was supposed to be in there filling the role of the college coach, he knew an awful lot about team needs for all 32 teams. And he knew he was like, and then, week 12, that's where things really turned for him. I was like, this guy has really been researching the NFL franchises. Is it
Stanford, Chip? He does his homework.
I'm just saying I've seen him on the draft coverage a lot. And I was just like, I wonder if this is a little audition tape for some GMs. Wonder if he's kind of trying to send some flares and some smoke signals. I saw David Shaw. I believe he's one of the funniest moments. It was, I think, a game against like San Diego State that they ended up winning. It was on the mothership, like the 10:30 kickoff on CBS Sports Network. And I just saw David Shaw standing like 30 yards from the rest of his team. He just was so disgusted by everything that was happening. I think David Shaw is a very, very good football coach, and what he accomplished during like that sort of like Rose Bowl, that peaking era, to be able to take over the reins from Jim Harbaugh and be competing for Pac-12 championships, to be competing for Pac-12 championships like all the way into just a couple years ago. I think that in terms of identity, it is a team that is kind of like floundering and lost its way a little bit instead of it just being that like party in the backfield, the mash you on defense, to have the running back that's going to really be able to carry you all the way in trying to open things up. I understand that some of that was leaning on some big body tight ends and wide receivers, but I think that the loss of identity, I think the way, and to your point, Bud, just the way that college football has continued to change in ways that don't necessarily help Stanford. I just wonder if that David Shaw who has NFL experience and who NFL, franchises have thought about for a long time. I wonder if it's if things are about running its course right now at Stanford.
I will say he's been very excellent against the spread. To whom those things matter.
Wait till name, image, and likeness opens up. Some of these nerd tech hedge fund guys are like, I want Stanford to be good again. They start buying talent to come in there. It's going to give you a game changer.
Well,
I got a coach on here.
I hope they don't pay for him in crypto after this morning.
Right. Exactly. I found another one that I think I should include when I say coaches who do more with less, because I kind of have a group in there. The reason they do more with less is academic restrictions. But Mark Stoops, what he's done at Kentucky, and Bud is significantly higher on him than most. I would probably fall right in the middle. Chip, you had him at 30. Tom, you had him at 35, but Bud has him as high as 16. I don't know if I'd have him quite that high, but you look at doing more with less at one of the, a decade ago was one of the worst jobs in college football potentially. And now, with a 10-win season under his belt, and I know they made some changes on the offensive staff, which were surprising, but I think Mark Stoops is a name that deserves more credit for the job he's done too.
Player development's my big word there.
Good scouting, seems to play within it. Like they seem to play to their own style, play within themselves in a much harder division than Kirk Ferentz is in, I would argue. Like I had him higher than Ferentz because I think he's better at all the things Ferentz is good at. If you put this Mark Stoops Kentucky team in the Big Ten West, are they not having the same results as Iowa?
Aren't they recruiting against Big Ten teams? Like, aren't they
beating them,
leaning in on the Ohio connection and just sort of taking it in there?
Yeah, right now I'd agree, but I also, Ferentz has been doing it for 20 years.
That's fair.
Yeah, that's
what I want to know, Bud. Why do you hate Wisconsin so much?
I think it's a top-down org. I said last podcast, I think for the most part, whoever you put in there, as long as they follow the blueprint, is going to win.
So is your Big Ten the lowest? If you've run some conference analysis, it sounds like your Big Ten, because I'm seeing a red next to Bielema, who you have at 60, and you've got Paul Christ at 35. I've got him at 10. Tom has him at 8, and you've got Ferentz at 46.
Yeah, I'm fairly low on the Big Ten coaches.
Why do you hate?
I'm higher on Ryan Day than everybody else.
Why do you hate America's farmers?
I mean, why do you give them this big of subsidies in the coaching ranks? I don't know.
Steve.
Oh man.
All right. Any other coaches on here? The to another one that you're high on, Neil Brown. Is that an industry? Neil Brown's got some industry love, right? There's a lot of people who talk about how they like Neil Brown. Maybe
Neil
more.
Brown, he did come on the 24/7 Sports Social Distance podcast last summer. I think Troy is a pretty hard job. Tougher than it used to be. I think he did a really nice job there. And since West Virginia has moved to the Big 12, I know Coco will hate this, but like they took the check in exchange for giving up an opportunity to win. Like they're not going to win in the Big 12, but I think he's done a respectable job there. He had a lot of rebuilding to do behind the scenes when Dana left, in my opinion, just from things I've heard. And I think he's doing a decent job. Now I may be high on him at 23. I really struggled between like 25 and 50. I thought you could throw these things in a hat and, like
you could
make an argument against these. I'm open to changing a lot of these in that range.
I'm not. My rankings are 100% correct.
Before we get out of here, Danny,
no others.
Can I ask Tom something?
Sure.
All right. If we're going to count Mac Brown's national championship from like 20 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it irrelevant what Lance Leipold and Chris Kleiman did at lower levels? Like that stood out to me because like Tom values consistency and winning and maximizing the talent you have. But yet Lance Leipold 50 and Chris Kleiman 49. Like that just seemed incongruous to me a little bit.
Well, I respect what Lance Leipold did at Wisconsin Whitewater. It's Wisconsin Whitewater, and there's a big gap between that and Power 5. And I respect what he did at Buffalo. So, but when it comes to coaches who are just entering the Power 5 level, like I said earlier, I kind of I want to see more of what they do at the Power 5 level when I'm comparing them to coaches who have already accomplished things. So I tend to start them lower. But that said, because of that, I felt like 50 was probably a pretty good start for Leipold, considering where I normally put coaches like that. And as for Kleiman, yeah, obviously the North Dakota State stuff works, and I really respect what he's been able to do at Kansas State so far. But for me, it's not all that different from what you were talking about with Wisconsin.
That's fair.
That
What
Kansas
he did at North
State's
Dakota
just
State.
built.
And
Oh,
then
Well,
North
Ron
Dakota-
Prince messed it up.
yeah. Yeah. But I'm saying at NDSU, that was already, they were winning, that was kind of already there. He maintained it. And again, that's not something anybody can just walk in and do. Kansas State, there's a blueprint that's been in place, and he hasn't really diversified too far from it. So I respect them both, but because those were part of the reasons why I wasn't really putting them up ahead of other guys. And some guys I just have personal preference for.